Flooding in Death Valley. Death Valley National Park is the driest spot in North America and one of the hottest places in the world. During the summer of 2022, severe rainstorms hit the region, causing an unprecedented amount of flooding. Described by meteorologists as a once-in-a-millennium event, it first started with a storm that dumped about 1.5 inches of water onto the arid valley in just 3 hours. This may not sound like a significant amount, but in a place that gets just 2.2 inches of rain a year, it was a lot, especially for one bout of rain. In fact, it almost beat the record for the highest recorded day of rainfall in Death Valley. And as a low-lying place with not much soil to soak up water, it doesn't take much water to cause a flood. Over 1,000 tourist and park employees were left stranded as flash floods took over the park. Even after the waters dried up, all roads in and out were left impassable thanks to the thick layers of mud and gravel left behind. Luckily, no serious injuries were reported after the incident. According to experts, an event like this happens once every 1,000 years in Death Valley. But as global climate change persists, scientists have warned that extreme weather events will be on the rise and will become especially more likely in the western half of America. 7. Record heat and deadly storms. In what's been described as a summer of hell, multiple parts of Europe experienced record high temperatures in the latter half of July 2023. For a week-long period, the continent's southern and eastern countries suffered consistent temperatures at or over 104 degrees Fahrenheit. The weather was unforgiving in certain areas like Sicily, where the heat reached approximately 115 degrees Fahrenheit, and Sardinia, where temperatures hit a peak of 118.4 degrees. Deadly wildfires broke out on the Greek island of Rhodes, prompting evacuation efforts and emergency conditions throughout the country. 19,000 civilians and tourists were shipped off the island by both air and sea. Wildfires also hit Italy, Portugal, Spain, and some parts of North Africa, claiming dozens of lives in the process. In Malta, power blackouts forced civilians to sleep outdoors, or if they were lucky, inside their cars with the air conditioning running at full blast. The record hot air mass was thankfully broken up by a strong cold front, which brought destructive and deadly storms to other regions of Europe. A tornado hit Milan, along with massive hailstones measuring up to 6.3 inches in diameter. In northeastern Italy, a resident found a hailstone measuring nearly 8 inches long. If these dimensions are correct, that means it's one of the biggest hailstones ever seen in Europe, coming second only to an 8.1-inch specimen found in 2010. The storms in Italy also ripped roofs straight off of homes, caused flash floods, uprooted trees, and caused severe electrical damage that set at least one house on fire. In Neuchâtel, Switzerland, buildings were damaged by 135-mile-per-hour winds, which reached speeds similar to a Category 4 hurricane in the country's western region. Footage captured in the city of La Chaux-de-Fonds featured trees being bent to the ground from the force of the storm, which also sent debris flying throughout the streets. Croatia also experienced one of its worst storms in history as severe weather hit the Balkan region. 4 people were killed, over 100 were injured, and at least 2,000 buildings sustained damage as high winds and torrential rains continued to batter the country. The hellish conditions lasted for over a week. Individually, it's hard to attribute all of the events to climate change. But scientists have pointed toward the heatwave and storms as collective evidence of intensifying weather patterns they believe might be caused by rising global temperatures. 6. Canada's record wildfires. Just like other natural disasters, wildfire seasons are normal in many places. But there's been a noticeable uptick in both the number and size of these fires in several regions, leading to rising concerns among experts that this trend will continue as climate change gets worse. In 2023, Canada experienced its worst recorded season of forest fires of all time. By mid-July, over 25 million acres of woods had already been destroyed by wild blazes. To put this into perspective, the total area ruined was equivalent to the state of Kentucky. And with more than a month of peak fire season left to go, it had already surpassed the past record for annual fire destruction from 1989, when over 18 million acres burned. As of August 1st, the fires had destroyed almost 4% of Canada's forests at a rate of over 7 times the long-year average for that portion of the year. At least 5 people were killed due to the fires, and over 120,000 residents had to be evacuated out of their homes. The air quality in the areas surrounding the fires also plummeted. On many occasions, smoke from the fires drifted southward and blanketed vast portions of the United States, including New York City, where the landscape took on a hazy Martian-like appearance. At one point, air quality levels in the Big Apple were the worst in the entire world, serving as a reminder that natural disasters have far-reaching effects. The smoke eventually reached overseas in Europe, where air quality levels were also drastically affected. Canada's fires were fueled mainly by the unusually high heat and dryness. Temperatures in the Northwest Territories province soared as high as 100 degrees, setting the all-time high for the hottest temperature ever taken north of 65 degrees latitude in the Western Hemisphere. If this trend continues, the forest fire problem will likely worsen. 5. Melting glaciers reveal long-missing hikers. Over the last century or so, at least 300 people have gone missing in the Alps. In 2022, Switzerland recorded its worst glacial melt rate since record-keeping started over 100 years ago. According to The Guardian, the country's glaciers lost about 6% of their remaining volume, almost double the previous record, which was set back in 2003. As glaciers recede at unprecedented rates, the remains of the long-lost individuals have popped up in Switzerland and other northern countries. In early 2014, the frozen corpses of 2 Austrian World War I soldiers came out from the melting ice in the Italian village of Paio. 3 years later, in 2017, the bodies of a couple who went missing in 1942 were found by a ski lift operator in Switzerland. Just a few weeks later, a missing hiker's hand and shoes were located on a Swiss mountain. Around the same time, a mountain climber discovered the bodies of 3 hikers who vanished on the Italian side of Mont Blanc, Europe's highest peak, decades ago in the 1990s. More recently, in 2023, a pair of climbers came across the remains of a German hiker who disappeared 37 years earlier while crossing a glacier in southern Switzerland. The discovery came months after the body of a British man who hasn't been heard from since 1974 appeared on a melting glacier in the Pennine Alps. As glacial melt continues, it's likely that more bodies will emerge. And while climate change is not exactly a good thing, the ability to bring long-awaited answers to missing people's loved ones is one of the few good things to come from this global concern. Are you worried about the melting glaciers? Let us know in the comments below and subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the video. 4. Extreme heat wave causes massive cattle die-off. Thousands of cattle suddenly dropped dead in southwestern Kansas over a multiple-day period in June 2022, sparking rumors that Bill Gates possibly had the livestock killed off for his own business interests. It's understandable that people started demanding answers. According to initial reports, the death toll was at least 2,000 cattle. But the actual number was probably much higher, especially since the die-off continued after the story broke. But Bill Gates was not the one responsible. According to industry officials, the deaths were brought on by an unusually high heat wave, which came with skyrocketing temperatures, high humidity, and very little wind, and there was no reason to think otherwise. Kansas State University cattle veterinarian A.J. Tarpoff told PBS that the deaths resulted in a true weather event that was isolated to only one part of the state. More specifically, he said that the major spike in humidity, paired with the sudden decrease in wind speeds, created the deadly conditions that made the cattle suffer from heat stress. Temperatures went from the 70s and 80s to a high of over 100 degrees Fahrenheit at its peak. While cattle owners usually prepare for the summer heat, the extreme weather proved to be just too much for much of the region's livestock, many of whom had not yet shed their winter coats. And with each head of cattle being worth about $2,000, it resulted in huge economic losses for farmers. Events like this are rare, but not entirely unheard of. According to Brandon Deppenbush, who runs a feedlot in Great Bend, it happens once every 10 to 20 years. Hopefully, this so-called perfect storm of conditions won't be seen for a very long time. 3. Excessive snow in drought-stricken California. During the 2022 to 2023 winter, California was battered by a deluge of unusual winter storms. In early March, a blizzard struck the state's mountains. For many, it was the worst storm they'd ever seen, including Andrew Schwartz, whose home doubles as the University of California's Central Sierra Snow Laboratory. Schwartz has seen his fair share of extreme weather conditions. He told the Washington Post that this was the first time he ever worried that he might not be able to make it out alive, and by a certain point, the snow was neck deep. Over a 2-week period, the region had over 12 feet of snow. The extreme whiteouts, 70-mile-per-hour winds, and more shut down highways and buried towns. Drivers were stranded, residents were trapped, roofs were collapsed, and communities experienced power outages. Ranch cattle became stranded and started starving to death because their owners had no way to get them food. Luckily, authorities stepped in to help, and hay was delivered to the animals by helicopter in an effort called Operation Hay Drop. The immediate effects of the snow were also massively destructive. But it also increased the snowpack in the central and southern Sierra Nevada mountains to nearly twice that of the annual average, which brought much-needed relief to a region that would have otherwise had its 4th year of severe drought. 2. Flooding in Appalachia. The central Appalachian region of the United States was in the middle of a drought when sudden heavy rainfall came in the summer of 2022. Thanks to the conditions brought on by the drought, the soil was unable to properly soak up the water, triggering horrible flash floods. Eastern Kentucky was hit hard by the deadly conditions, which killed over 36 people. About 100 bridges were destroyed, while roads were washed away or blocked by debris, rendering them impassable for weeks. Around 9,000 houses across 13 counties were damaged or destroyed, preventing thousands of residents from returning home when the floodwaters receded. In a historically poor area where many families were struggling to make ends meet, the costs of fixing their homes, replacing their belongings, and finding a place to stay were inconceivable. Local infrastructure was also damaged in many places, where electricity, internet, and other basic things became unavailable. The 2022 floods were some of the most extreme in Kentucky's history. Much like the floods that hit Death Valley around the same time, experts describe the flooding as a once-in-every-1,000 years event. But this type of weather could become more frequent as global temperatures rise, and Appalachia is particularly vulnerable to climate change. Unfortunately, most local governments are not prepared to respond to future disasters. 1. Pakistan's mega monsoons. Over a 3.5-month period starting in June 2022, Pakistan experienced its wettest monsoon season since record-keeping began in 1961. Rainfall levels hit 500% above average in what was described as monsoons on steroids. The torrential downpours overwhelmed the Indus River, and at the same time, a heatwave caused glacial melting, triggering flash floods throughout the country and forming a massive inland lake measuring 62 miles across. At least 1/3 of Pakistan was submerged underwater, forcing around 8 million people to leave their homes. Entire towns and farms were either submerged or destroyed, and over 1,700 people died in the disaster. Survivors took shelter in displacement camps, abandoned buildings, and roadside tents. Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari told CNN that the country's officials knew that they should expect more extreme weather patterns because of climate change, but they weren't prepared for the catastrophic conditions they were plagued with. He said that he hoped it wasn't a new climate reality, but scientists have suggested it could very well become one. In the immediate aftermath, Many criticized the government's slow rescue response, while local officials were accused of hoarding humanitarian aid. The looting of relief goods has also become a major issue. As the one-year anniversary of the floods quickly approached, Pakistani officials claimed that most people had gone back to their homes. But non-governmental organizations that work directly with survivors have revealed that millions are still struggling and in dire need of humanitarian aid to help with malnutrition and the lack of clean drinking water. Thanks for watching. What's the craziest natural phenomenon you've ever experienced? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. Bye for now.